You're listening to the Generation and Generation podcast, episode 6. Joining me on the podcast today is author and professor Tasha Chapman. Tasha currently serves at Covenant Theological Seminary as a professor of educational ministries. She has co-authored several books, including The Politics of Ministry, Navigating Power Dynamics and Negotiating Interests, and the book Resilient Ministry, What Pastors Told Us About Surviving and Thriving. Our conversation covers a wide range of topics, including navigating some of the pressures of serving in the church, and the reality that in ministry settings as anywhere, we are confronted with politics and navigating power dynamics. Tasha offers great advice on ministry that I think will be a source of encouragement. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. Joining me on the podcast today is Tasha Chapman. Tasha currently serves at Covenant Theological Seminary as a professor of educational ministries. She has co-authored several books that have been a real source of encouragement to me over the years, the books The Politics of Ministry and the book Resilient Ministry, which I'm hoping we can talk through in our conversation today. In addition to serving as a professor, Tasha was a contributor to the ESV Women's Devotional Bible and has served the local church in campus ministry and leading women's ministry. Really excited to have you on the show today, Tasha.
Thank you. It's really fun to be with you, Michael.
Well, I think maybe a good place for us to start is just kind of wondering, if you could share with our listeners a little bit about your first memory of hearing the gospel preached and how God called you into vocational ministry.
Yeah, I have a very clear first memory of hearing the gospel. I was in high school, and a friend invited me to go with her to a Bible study she was attending, and I thought, in my pride, oh, this is good. I'll get to the core of what this weird Christianity stuff is, thinking that I was just being a good scientific observer. And of course, I go to this Bible study, and this young adult college age, I think, leader just loved on us so well that I was immediately drawn in to just be present with the group. And they were studying the book of Romans, and I couldn't understand a bit of what they were reading in the Bible. Didn't understand it, so I was that classic non-believer in the Bible study asking all the right, totally naive questions. Yeah. And so I remember this leader just backing up in Romans and showing me, basically just backing up and showing me how Paul was thinking about us humans in relationship to God, and basically walked me through the gospel. So yeah, it was very stunning. I had never heard anything like that, and yet the Lord obviously was working in me already, and just it just went to the core of my heart, and sensing, oh, that's what's wrong with me. That's what's going on. This is so naming my world, and my separation from God. So yeah, it was a little bit of a dramatic time.
Yeah. And I think from that, how would you just describe just kind of God leading you into vocational ministry just from those early days?
Yeah, it was just a long process. My first, being a new believer as I went to college, I joined a campus ministry and got a lot of great training in the basics of evangelism and discipleship and Bible study and small groups, and was really thrilled with that. Really felt a sense of growth in my own life and being able to see fruit in my own life. We don't often get to see clear evidence of God changing us, and that was very obvious to me. It gave me a wonderful love for ministry right there. But vocationally, I was studying engineering, graduated with an engineering degree, but did not like what I saw out in industry. Took the typical plant trip seniors take, and really thought, ooh, this is so crushing work. Like, I really don't want to spend 80 hours a week in a soap factory.
Yeah.
And which was one of the plant trips I took, literally.
Oh, wow.
And so I went back to work on a teaching degree to teach math and physics, and spent a summer teaching an accelerated program for teenagers, and had this, just a wonderful experience of working with them on math and physics, but felt like my hands literally were tied behind my back because I was not allowed to talk to them about Jesus or to invite them to church or share my personal life. I mean, we were watched by master teachers the whole time. We had no access to the teens outside of class. And that experience of just the frustration of not being able to be true and honest in the sense of my relationship with these wonderful young people, I think that's what the Lord used to say, hey, what about trying this full time? And so I went directly from that experience into campus ministry then, in a sense, never leaving school.
Yeah.
Always, I feel like I've always been working with students, and that's been a passion, but without my hands tied.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I've shared this with you before, Tasha. I'm just so thankful just for your ministry and how God has used your gifts, just even personally, just the impact that it's had on me, just in pastoral ministry and counseling, and just even in working with clients from a counseling standpoint, how much your book that you co-authored with Don Guthrie and Bob Burns, Resilient Ministry, what a blessing that has been. And even just wanting to kind of press in a little bit today to the new book that just came out, The Politics of Ministry, which also just was just a huge blessing to me, kind of working through that recently. But, several months ago, I had someone say, and I've heard a variation of this comment, over the past 22 years of ministry, but the person came up and said, my last church had too much drama, and there better not be any politics in this church. And, it's funny because you start the book sharing that, in this quote, ministry work is people work, and people work is messy. And later you go on to write that all ministry involves politics, and this is not a problem, just a fact. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to just the definition of politics in ministry that you use in the book.
Yeah, that was a real issue for us to discuss and decide on. The three of us that worked on this book had used the term politics in our work with the seminary students and in workshops with marketplace and ministry leaders. So we had watched what happens to people when we use that term. Mm-hmm. And it does have that rather shock effect. It usually comes with an enormous amount of negative connotations. And we all know that sense of this situation. It could be at work, at church, even in our small group Bible study, has too much drama. Like, I hate the politics of this.
Yeah.
And we name it politics, and it's very, it means people are getting hurt. And they are. And what we did is we decided, using that word, even though we add a lot of negative connotation to it, actually wakes us up and shakes us up to realize, no, there's no such thing as people working together and there not being politics. In other words, better for us to open our eyes and realize that whenever we're trying to do something together as people, and this isn't just due to sin, but because we're different, we're going to come with different interests, different values, different perspectives on the issue, and then we're going to use whatever abilities we have to move things the way we think they ought to be done. And so this is a fact, and we want to flatten, in a sense, the term. And we found it really helpful to then invite people to think of politics as a neutral term, as something that's always going on and not necessarily having to be hurtful or sinful, but that what we're needing is to actually say, oh, people always have different perspectives, different interests, different values, and they're always working out of those. So if we would name that and work with that clearly, instead of just trying to make it go away, and just act like, no, everyone should always think the same thing and get along, we would be less frustrated, and we'd actually be wiser and be able to be more redemptive in our work. So it is a shocking word for us to use. It's a little bit tricky that way. And the first thing we do is, in a sense, jolt ourselves to say that this is daily experience. Mm-hmm. Anytime we're doing something with people, that even if we have a common goal and we all agree, for the simplest example is a group of 3 or 4 people want to go out for lunch. So everyone's eager for the same goal. We all want to have a good time together in fellowship, going out for lunch, right? So that looks simple, and yet the reality is we have different interests. Maybe some people have food allergies. Maybe some people don't like different types of cuisine. They don't want to eat at certain types of restaurants, for example, or onions give them a lot of indigestion, so they don't want to go somewhere where there's onions and everything, like an Indian restaurant, right? And so if we're just more honest with ourselves and say, hey, we're going to, even in deciding where we go out to lunch, that's politics. We're going to be needing to negotiate our interests together, and that's okay. So let's do that. Let's do that well. Let's realize we are going to use our power, our ability to influence each other as we negotiate where to go out for lunch. And we can do this with humility and with seeking to understand each other and love. It doesn't have to lead to people getting injured or hurt or run over. So just flattening that word and giving us the word politics as a tool, instead of something to say, oh, this is all bad, it's political, but say, no, of course there's politics here, and so now let's work with it. Let's work with the fact that we're going to bring differing abilities to the decision-making process. We're going to bring different values and perspectives. Instead of reacting negatively to that and fearing the conflict, actually inviting and setting up the negotiating process, inviting people to be honest and try to discover what their interests are as we move forward. So yeah, it's a little bit of a switch.
Yeah.
We're quite hesitant that the editors want to title the book with the word politics, especially in our society today. Like, that is just not a pleasant word to use. But for us to use it technically with this flat description in order to help us perceive things differently can really be helpful to us.
Yeah, I found it to be really helpful just because it strikes me, Tasha, just that there's an intentionality. And so when I think of, say, ministry staff or team or a session or an elder board, having that perspective that these are dynamics are a reality, and how do we negotiate those dynamics and those realities in a way that gives honor and glory to the Lord. And then on a lighter note, you're in St. Louis, and I'm spent about 20 years in St. Louis, and when you're negotiating lunch decisions, the correct answer is Pappy's Barbecue in downtown St. Louis, right?
That's right.
So that's what you hope that as you're navigating the conversation and the interest, that it lands at Pappy's Barbecue, right? So
that's right.
But I think it's just helpful, just kind of thinking through, how do we navigate those dynamics well? One of the things, in the book, you quote a pastor, who says, all formal power in a church or any organization runs out quickly, and ultimately all power devolves down to a level of relationship. And if I haven't developed trust with people, I can only go so far. And so I was wondering your thoughts on, where you see that we're at as far as training the next generation of pastors and ministry leaders to understand the significance of just the importance of relationship.
Right. And I think, I think in one sense, just looking at our seminary students and how the culture has changed in these last 20 years, and how different our students are now that are feeling called to vocational ministry than they were even 15 years ago. In some ways, I think they've got it. They understand this better certainly than we did 30 years ago. In some ways. So, for example, researchers argue, about their generalizations of millennials, but most of them agree that millennials tend to be highly relational and prioritize relationships over tasks. So that can be a really great thing, because when we're working on ministry, in a sense, they'll already be saying, well, of course, I'm going to stop in the hall, even when I'm going down the hall to get copies off the copy machine, right? Some very simple task. of course I'm going to stop and chit chat with Sam as I pass him in the hall. And if he really needs to talk for an hour, I'm going to just stop whatever task I was doing and talk to him for an hour. So there's some sense where generationally, I think they're leaning much more towards relationship and away from task, just as a generation. I think that's very helpful. But what's not helpful is this general dislike and distrust of formal power and organizational hierarchy. This idea that just because you have a title, senior pastor or director of children or whatever, I don't want to ascribe more authority to you or more power. Power meaning just your ability to get things done, your capacity to influence people. I don't want to allow that you actually have more of that because of your formal title. And again, I think that's just a blinder. There's a lot of good and important things about giving people titles and formal power, that is formal capacity to get things done. We need the organization. We need clear channels of communication and authority and accountability in the church and in our ministries to function well. And so it's not something that should just be flattened all the time. So I think with this generation, the desire, in a sense, to just flatten the organizational chart, to have everybody to have the same title and to pretend that there's no organizational difference or difference in power is actually quite naive, and it doesn't serve us well. So in this way, it's a challenge, kind of going to, I think, almost the other direction from where my generation was in seminary 30 years ago, where we really need to learn that, no, there's a reason to have different levels of authority and capacity and decision-making, and it's about how do we hold that stewardship well. How do you hold your title well with humility, but use it well for the flourishing of the church, right? You don't get the title for yourself so that you can be the hero, so that you can be the boss that makes all the decisions and tells people what to do and sets the goal by yourself or the vision, et cetera. This generation gets that. They don't want that, in fact. Oftentimes I feel like we have to coax our students to even consider taking a senior pastor or solo pastorate role because they're so hesitant to have that formal power, in a sense, that comes with a title like that. So there's a real tension there. Relationship is what counts, but you have to work within the fact that people have different interests and values and different abilities to get things done, different power, and to not see that as a sinful state, but as part of the diversity of the body of Christ. And then how do we use our differences even there and are responsible to the amount of power? You could even put giftedness in there if you want to use other churchy terms or things. But how do we use that for the flourishing of all? It flips it on its head a little bit and says, no, you can't just make formal power a bad thing.
And that's helpful. I mean, I think, just as I talk to ministry leaders and friends who are in ministry, just trying to navigate just the tension of what you're talking about, and just kind of just curious, just in your experience and just research, what would you say, to the pastor, somebody listening to this, maybe some things that would be helpful for them kind of holding that tension well, just as far as being really open or open-handed to, okay, how do people on my staff experience me? What would be some things that would help them to navigate where they're at, in that tension?
Right. And I think, the first step is to ask that question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just like you say, can we pause long enough in our fast-paced culture actually reflect on what is my power, in a sense. Where do I feel like I have capacity to act and influence people, and what are my relationships? It's that both sides. Where is there trust built? Who can I communicate with honestly and respectfully? Who will communicate with me honestly, but yet respectfully, even when we differ in our ideas and our perspectives, etc. And so that's the place to start, is just asking ourselves and reflecting on what is my power, what is my capacity, what are people ascribing to me? For example, as soon as we get a title in ministry, especially if we're stepping into a new ministry or a new church, often a lot of disgruntled people will flock to us. We will be the magnet for everyone that has a complaint or wants something changed immediately. The church will be like, oh, finally, here's this person. They have a title now. They're a paid staff person at ministry. Finally, they're going to fix this thing, right? And what's happening is people are ascribing to us a whole lot of power because of our formal position. They're ascribing to us a whole lot of capacity to get things done quickly, that actually we don't have that capacity because we don't have the relationship built. We don't have the trust with people. In a sense, we might have formal power in the title of our new job, but we don't have the relational power. We don't have the capacity to actually get things done with people. So we have to slow down and not just jump to changing things and making decisions out of that formal title. So I guess my second point of advice is, after the reflective work on who's ascribing power to me and what kind of power and capacity do I actually have, is what kind of trust do I have with people, what kind of relationships, and then what are they expecting of me? I think the expectations of people on us when we're in a position of leadership are often very hidden, and the only way to get them unhidden is to have those hard conversations, is to actually ask people what, without any defense shields up on our part, right? But we're really trying to build trust, and to ask them, how do you perceive me in my job, or what is it you really wish would change, or where you might have frustrations with me, and how I'm moving things forward. And so that process takes time. And so we just have to slow down. And that's hard on us. We have this title, we have this responsibility to get things done. And then we think, of course, in this individual culture, it's all on me personally to get these things done as quickly as I can figure it out. But of course, in actual truth is it's much more about the manner in which we pursue people in order to get things done, so that we're listening carefully to them and helping them feel like they have say, like they've been heard. So in a sense, what we're doing there by asking good questions, listening carefully to people with contrary interests and frustration and things, is to advocate for them. We're trying to help them feel like, in a sense, they have more power because we are building trust with them and letting them know that they are heard. Now, we're not saying we agree with them necessarily, right? So this has to be honest, but for someone to really feel understood and feel like their perspective and their interests have been heard is huge and can really calm the systems down of our ministry.
Yeah, I think just even as you say that, Tasha, just thinking through the Gospels, just the non-anxious presence of Jesus in just such highly anxious situations, and just his identity, being so solid in who he was, his relationship with the Father, who he was as the Son of God, and just in the midst of people, inviting him to different things. I even think of they have the term when people in unhealthy ways they refer to as flying monkeys to try to, emissaries to kind of sway you or manipulate you into a certain position. And even, someone bringing this point to me a few weeks ago, as far as John the Baptist sending his followers to Jesus to say, or we thought you would be somebody else, or are you the Messiah? And John the Baptist isn't even having the conversation with Jesus. He's sending other people to kind of ask the question of really kind of saying, you're not doing what we really expected as far as what a leader should be and what we thought the Messiah would be. And just Jesus's response and how non-anxious he is just in that moment. And I just think where we're at culturally, just the things we really tend to celebrate in leaders, and it just makes me think of how you share how one pastor, in the book said bluntly, I love the ministry, but I can't deal with people. And it just seems like, from that quote, and I've heard versions of that just sadly from people, and where it seems like that we are drawn as human beings, and we gravitate towards just the charismatic leader. And I think of people being drawn to Saul because of his physical appearance, or Jesse, not even including his son David when the prophet Samuel initially asked for all of his sons. And so I'm just kind of wondering, from your research and ministry experience, what impact do you think it has on the church or ministries when leaders are really picked based on, what I refer to as kind of the AAA qualities, which are, achievement, attractiveness, and articulation. When those are kind of the metrics that we're choosing our leaders by, what impact would you say it has on a system?
Yeah. I can clearly state from all the research we did, all the research other people have done that we've looked at, that really ultimately harms the church. At first, it makes us look successful to the broader society, because those are indeed the qualities that our culture prioritizes. But again, when we look at those qualities of achievement, again, that's that task-oriented of just getting things done, visual attractiveness, gift of speaking, we realize that's not the leaders that God chose for his people. They weren't, we think of Moses as soon as we think of articulation.
Mm-hmm.
He obviously was not articulate. Speaking wasn't his gift, and yet he's amazing, one of our most amazing leaders of God's people ever. And so it's a sad thing that the church mirrors our culture's priorities instead of God's emphasis on character and humility for our leaders. Because again, with power comes, with that authority and capacity to influence people and to influence what happens, comes a lot of responsibility. And so I think the Bible is very clear that character is much more the issue. And we really have a hard time in ministry evaluating character and humility for leaders, because that's a much harder thing to evaluate and assess when you're going through an interview process and a hiring process. So I think it's sad we mimic too much the business community on those things in ways that lead to a good bottom line. Things are easily counted. The business marketplace community is known for having that single bottom line of, does it create a profit? And so often in ministry, we are doing the same thing, of course, with the culture that surrounds us, and says, well, does this individual leader, are they bringing us success? And success for us is the same thing as in the marketplace. It's what's easily counted. As one pastor said, it's nickels, noses, and noise. And the more nickels you have, the more noses you have, people attending, and the more noise you have, the more just activity for activity's sake, then your ministry is counted as successful. And of course, that's very contrary to how Scripture describes fruitfulness and faithfulness, and corporately and individually growth towards maturity in Christ. So I'd rather, that in ministry, instead of the 3 A's of achievement, attractiveness, and articulation, if we could really push back against our culture and say, boy, we're interested in leaders that are calm with anxiety, that advocate for others, and that help others have agency to act and influence. In other words, using the very words, in a sense, from the best of the business leadership research.
Can I say amen? Can I say amen while you're talking,
yeah.
Tasha? Is that okay if I just
yeah.
throw that in there?
So these 3 A's.
yeah.
Yeah. My 3
No, I'm
A's,
just amen to what. Yeah, I just think
will
that's just
catch us so differently.
so helpful to what you're saying.
Yeah. Because again, to not use the Christian terms, because too many times we use the common Christianese in our ministries, but we need to use different terms to wake us up to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, to use intentionally the marketplace terms of what we're wanting in leaders is someone that can deal with anxiety, advocate for others, and give agency. We're to be equipping equippers, to use Pauline terms. About our ministry and leadership, and that means we're giving others agency to act and influence their world redemptively. That we're using our power to help others have more power, to help others have more capacity to act and influence their world, and we're advocating for the least of these. I mean, just to smash marketplace wording with Jesus wording. And of course, all ministry is about change and growth makes people anxious. People fearful for change. Even if it's a really good change, there's going to be conflict involved. People are going to have different perspectives about it, and it's going to make them nervous, and there's going to be loss. They're going to experience loss because of the good change. And so for leaders to understand that and to realize that the anxiety in the group of people, that anxiousness, that fearfulness, that one of their major roles is to help people calm down.
Yeah.
Just to say it really clearly without using biblical language.
Yeah. Well, and I think, just there's so much, Tasha, what you just said. I was just like, we need multiple hours for this podcast, and you're probably teaching a class today at seminary. So, but I think there's just so much to what you just shared. And I think even, the evaluating and assessing humility and character, for those who are on both sides of the candidating process. What I mean by that, the ministry leader who's candidating with a particular system. And so what are the values or the things that the system values, is, important to them. And then for, say, a candidating committee that's looking at a pastor, really pressing into, is this someone that is going to lower anxiety, is going to, fight for the agency of others to where they don't have to be the hero, that they're really pointing people to Christ and really seeing it as a privilege to love those not only in the body, but those they're on staff with as fellow image bearers. And I think one of the things that's been really heartbreaking to me that I would say I've seen pastorally and also as a counselor is just this trend in vocational ministry, just the rise of narcissistic ministry leaders and systems, and just the real devastation that brings just to the church and to individual believers. And, I appreciate what you wrote when you said, unhealthy relational capital is built on fear, domination, and awe of formal power. This counterfeit relationship capital is highly unreliable. It can disappear in a moment of truthful insight on the part of those with less power. And so I was wondering, from your research and interviews, what your thoughts were on some of the characteristics of these types of unhealthy or toxic systems, along with, how someone with less power can be faithful if they find themselves in that particular situation.
Yeah, those are big, hard questions, and it is sad. There's quite a bit of research out there that shows that in this country, and I don't know about others, we really have put narcissistic people in leadership, and that it has really devastated our ministries. We're so in love with celebrities. We so love heroes. I mean, just look at our hero movie industry, right? I mean, it's just gigantic now. We're spreading this worship of heroes, I think, around the globe right now with all our movies about superheroes. And yet we actually do that in our lives. We want someone that's just going to make everything right, that's going to fix everything. We want to ascribe success to the individual, not to the team, not to the Lord. So as a culture, we really love this idea of having the person that has all the answers be in charge, and actually pretending to ourselves that gets us off the hook. So it's an interesting challenge in our culture. We certainly have brought it right into the church. And so, yes, there are, we've seen a lot of similar characteristics in systems that can look on the outside very healthy and thriving, because, again, the numbers are growing. What we'll see is, a church growing very, very quickly. We can say, wow, that's a real sign of God working there. But actually, we need to take another look and say, or is this a real sign that church or ministry is following the hero leadership path of the culture, and that the people up front are actually moving towards what you named very well as this narcissistic form of leadership. So what one place that I would go right away, and I've done this as a consultant, and it happens every time, is just let me sit in a leadership meeting. If I can just watch a leadership meeting or two, I pretty much can tell you what the state of the system is, how relationships are working together to get things done there, and where there are things that are unhealthy going on. For example, if a leadership meeting has no conflict during it, then I would say there's probably a very unhealthy system and very unhealthy leadership in place. Because what that means is people are taking their resources to be together face to face to make important decisions, and yet no one's bringing up the real interests that they walked into the room with if there's no conflict at the meeting. Yeah. And when I use the word conflict, I mean there needs to be the different perspectives. People need to be, not unlovingly, but they need to have space to argue, to actually explain their different interests, to explain how people are going to be impacted by these decisions. And people are going to be impacted in very different ways. And if there isn't time in the meeting to work on what those different interests are and how people are going to be impacted by what's being decided, but everyone's just agreeing that, yeah, whatever the leader says, we're all on board, and just showing that fake unity of we're all on board, we all have the same vision, go, yeah, this is how we're going to do it, where the meeting really ends up being more about, just giving lip service to whatever the leader is doing and deciding. That would show that actually probably underneath that is a lot of fear, a lot of domination by somebody in the room at that meeting, such that people are not being honest, that varying interests are not being drawn out and understood well. And so what we end up seeing then, if we go outside the boardroom, outside the planning table, then we'll see leaders feeling very much like they have to have all the answers, that they have to solve the problems, that they have to bring the solutions to the meeting and not use the meeting as a place to come up with possible various solutions. So in part, I want to say even the leader that desperately doesn't want to be the unhealthy leader can feel so pressed to have all the answers, to have set the vision, to gain the success, to solve the problems, that they actually act that way, thinking that that's their job to act that way. And so they will command and control. They will carry out decisions quickly, meaning there's no time for the dissenting voices. And then, of course, if this person also happens to be very gifted orally, very gifted in their use of words and speaking and preaching, then it really shuts down other people being vocal. And so it just heightens that unhealthy process of it moving towards a narcissistic, unhealthy leadership situation. And what you find outside the meeting place is that people are actually having the important conflictual conversations in the halls, and at the coffee pot and behind closed doors. And so what you see is communication is actually minimal systemically across all the various people in the relationship. You can see that a lot of people don't know what's going on until a decision's already been made. So in a sense, you've got a lot of secrets going on. That shows you that there's a real lack of health and in the system, that you've probably got a leader, willingly or unwillingly, that's playing the role of the hero leader at the top.
Yeah. This is just so helpful, Tasha. I mean, I just think just so appreciated just your work as far as, because you Don and Bob really press into these dynamics in the politics of ministry. I'm just kind of wondering, for the person who's listening and just really resonating with just the picture that you're describing, what would you say to that person as far as some other resources that could really be just humanizing and just frame things in a way of just, hey, I'm not alone, that you found just in your study, just in ministry, maybe other resources or other things that you think would be helpful for that person?
Yeah, I'm glad to. Some of I'm speaking for all three of us, some of our favorite resources are the books that Peter Scazzero has put out from his work with emotional intelligence in ministry. So all three of his books on that I can highly recommend, because they really work us through that need for reflection on ourselves and how things are impacting us relationally and emotionally, and then therefore reflection on the relationships around us. So getting that systemic view of what are the relationships around us, where is trust being built or broken. And so other books from the marketplace can be really helpful to us in ministry, again, just to give us the tools to see these dynamics at work. So like The Speed of Trust is a very popular one. Teaming is another book that we've seen really help pastors and ministry leaders, because they're books based on solid research. So it's not just single person's idea of how to lead and how to do things, but just bringing more that holistic research of a lot of observation work on humans and on our society and how we tend to do things, right? So that we can push against some of these unhealthy tendencies. And of course, one of the simplest things for us to do is just to slow down and to start asking good questions. For example, to slow down that planning meeting and saying, who's not at the table right now as we make this decision that's going to be impacted by this decision?
Yeah.
And what might they have to gain or lose based on what we're deciding? That takes us just slowing down a little bit and remembering that each decision, each change, each task of getting done is going to impact people around us. And just stop and reflect on that. What is that impact? And if we don't know, maybe we need to pause and go talk to those people, or at least some representative people, to find out what do they think? What are they worried about losing or gaining in what we do next in a particular ministry situation?
Well, Tasha, it's really, I would say, difficult to bring this conversation to a close, just how helpful it's been talking with you, and just what a encouragement it's been, and just so thankful for just your ministry. Really appreciate our conversation today, and such a good reminder, I would say, of the privilege and responsibility of loving and leading those we're in relationship with as followers of Christ. And so we're going to wrap up now. And Tasha, so thankful for your time today and how the Lord is using you. Was wondering if you could lead us in a closing prayer.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Michael. You can tell I'm just passionate about these things and eager for us all, including myself, of course, to work on them. So let's pray. Father, thank you that you promised us wisdom through your Spirit when we asked in faith. Lord, we do ask for all of us in ministry leadership, from leading small groups and Sunday schools or one-on-ones or outreaches to leading huge congregations, whatever the task and role that you've gifted us with. We need your wisdom. Father, help us to slow down and re-challenge the values that our culture is pushing on us, the very air that we're breathing, to have heroes, to have leaders that can do it all. Help us push back and remember that it's character and walking with you that is the priority. Help us to seek out understanding of how our decision impacts those around us. Help us to slow down and ask good questions. Lord, help us to listen well to our people and the fear that they bring to the changes in the very work that we're trying to lead. Help us to understand what their values are and where their perspectives are things we need to know and understand in order to lead them even more wisely. Help us trust, Lord, that the power and influence you've given us is for the growth of the people around us also in power and influence. It's not a competition, Father, like our culture tells us. It's not. It's the equipping of the saints for your good and redemptive work in this world, Lord. Please help your church with this so that we might be all more unified and look more like Jesus in our growth. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Tasha.
Thank you so much, Michael. Real privilege.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. If you know someone who might enjoy or be encouraged by the show, feel free to share the podcast with them. Your willingness to share the show is one of the best ways to help it grow. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time.